I didn't want to leave a legacy to my kids of pain or victim or poor me or anger or, the drunk. I didn't want that for them because of how I grew up. Even though my mom was my best friend and she was a very good woman, I still didn't want my kids to have that. I wanted them to have something. I wanted them to have the legacy. And so, that was important to me. And that to me is something that does take courage, but I think God gives you the courage if you lean into Him.
Hey guys, it's Nancy and welcome to the She Laughs podcast. Sit down with me while I chat and get personal with some insanely cool women as they share their smarts and their hearts. God gave us each unique gifts and we got to use them. Inside each one of us is a cool girl. So buckle up. Let's get vulnerable. Let's get real and let's laugh. Hey guys, so glad you could join us today because I feel super excited about this guest today and what she is going to share with us all. Welcome to the She Laughs podcast. And if y'all will join me in welcoming Tonya Shellnut to the program. Hi, Tonya. So glad you're here.
Thank you.
You have found yourself called, as you were telling me earlier, as a mission almost. Your ministry, I think was the word you used, to really help others. And I'd love to hear how that came about, why you feel called to do it. And then, I think it's really important for the people listening that they understand sort of the fear you might have faced in doing what you're doing. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great. Just how you got started in this.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to give some backstory, right? Let's just start from the beginning because that sets the table for where we are today. And I want to share a little bit with your audience about my upbringing and my story to give them insight as to why I'm doing what I am today. And it starts off, when I was 6 months old, my birth father abandoned my mother and I. So he left and my mom ended up marrying an alcoholic. And so I grew up in a home. It was just myself and my mom and my alcoholic stepdad. And my parents liked to go out and party a lot. And in one particular night, my parents were looking for a babysitter and brought in a stranger, a neighbor who was 18 years old, male. We didn't know him. I didn't know him. And he sexually assaulted me when I was 5 years old. And so I actually blacked out that incident until I was in about 5th grade. And then, we were going through the teachings of the body functions in 5th grade and all the visuals and memories came back and I began to remember what happened. And I had acted out. I didn't really know. I was very fear-based, wasn't really sure, why I was behaving the way I was. And then in
You mean up to 5th grade or
up to
after?
5th grade. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, even after, but even then up to 5th grade. If you look back, much of my childhood was lived in fear. And so, I never wanted to be left alone. I didn't want to go to school, like just all these different things. And so when I got into 6th grade, I started drinking. So I'm 12 when I had my first drink of alcohol. And I really connected with the alcohol and it became a source of comfort for me. And so I would...
Can I ask you something really quick?
Yeah.
How did you in 6th grade, how was alcohol introduced to you? I know you said your parents were drinkers.
Yep.
But how did that happen if you're 12?
So we had a liquor cabinet and the liquor was just there and available.
Okay.
And so we were able to access it and do all the sneaky things that kids do. Pour the water in, all of that. And also, my parents were still, drinking and partying. So they're not always paying attention to everything. So it was very easy. Yeah. So it was very easy to access that. And growing up where I did, there was always alcohol at every function. So it was just very easy to access it. Okay. So started drinking. And then when I got into high school, I started dating a guy who was 6 years older than I was. And he was, my parents actually allowed him to live with us. So I'm a junior and a senior in high school, and this guy is living with us. And when he would drink, he was physically abusive. And so I have a scar on my face from a time when he chose to hit me. And so there's a lot of other things that we don't really have the time to get into. But my adoptive dad was also cheating on my mom. And so he would have affairs, and I would go with my mom to, track down the girlfriend or him or whatever it was. And there was just this incredible amount of chaos happening. And so I just kept going back to the alcohol and to the alcohol. So I get out of high school and I'm getting ready to go to college. I'm in college, and the guy that I was dating, he had moved back home to Washington State. And
so he didn't know you were coming.
All of these promises to change behavior. And so when I left, I threw the ring at him and, said some not so nice things. And about a week later, or maybe a month later, I can't remember, it's all blurry, but I got a phone call from his parents, and he had committed suicide and left me, of all of them, I got left the suicide note. And the suicide note said, I tried to reach you, but you weren't available. And so immediately this incredible amount of guilt takes over, because I'm like, well, if I would have been there, he might not have killed himself. And so that then furthered even more alcohol and more drinking and, just trying to shove that pain further down, and just living.
You're young. You're early 20s. Or 19, 20.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So that was a time in my life where I was just, heavily drinking, living, just making terrible decisions, drinking to blackout. I'm not remembering, some of my drinking escapades. And so, about 2 years later, I met my current husband. Now we are celebrating 30 years.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yes. Yeah. So he had said to me, he's like, Tonya, do you think you have a drinking problem? And I said, no, I'm good. And he's like, well, I think you do. And he had just recently gotten sober in the Navy. So he, obviously he could identify someone with a drinking problem. So I actually kind of liked him. So I went to the treatment center and because I was just going to go and they were going to tell me how to be a social drinker. And I went there and they're like, oh no, you're much sicker than you think. So they put me in inpatient for 28 days. And I asked Rich, I'm like, well, what do you think? And he's like, well, if you want to be with me, you need to be sober. And I really liked him. So I didn't go into treatment for myself. I went into treatment for him because I liked him. And that was the only way it was going to work. Well, just suffice it to say, just celebrated 30 years of sobriety, or 31 years of sobriety. I haven't had a drink since, but it's been a full circle. And so I want to kind of just back up into, what happened in treatment and to where we are now, and why, to get back to your question of, why are you doing what you're doing? So I didn't grow up churched. I didn't know anything about Jesus. I knew nothing. And
I was going to ask you this. Okay.
So I knew nothing about Jesus. When you go to 12-step programs, they talk about higher power, whatever. But my husband had taken me to church a couple times. And then tragically, my husband and I were getting ready to move across the country. And my mom died in a motorcycle accident. And obviously my mom and I were best friends. I am an only child from her, and I loved her dearly. Sure. And so when she passed, I was devastated. And my husband was like, we're going to go to church. And I was like, okay, well, again, I didn't have any idea what that looked like, but the Lord was, wooing me to him.
Sure. Yes.
So we ended up finding a church and getting plugged in and getting baptized together and beginning to live out our life with Christ. And you don't know it at the time, just how wounded you are, right? Like, you're wounded, but you don't realize how wounded
but you
are.
don't know, right, how big.
And I struggled. Yeah, I struggled in the beginning with it because I always was like, well, why would a loving God allow for a child to, first off, be abandoned by her father, secondly, be sexually assaulted, and then, physically abused, and then, the suit, like, I didn't understand it. And I was like, why would God do that to me?
I'm so glad you brought that up because so many people struggle with that.
Yeah. So I struggled with it. And, my husband just kept saying, Tonya, God didn't make these people do this. This is a fallen world. And that, and he didn't say it quite like this, but this is how I heard it was, are you going to live hell here on earth, always questioning God? Or are you just going to choose to believe that he's a loving God and really cares for you? And that's easier said than done in the moment, right? But I really was at that point of, I have two choices. Like, what am I going to live over here in anger and bitterness at God for allowing this to happen to me? Or am I going to go, okay, you know what, Lord, you allowed this. Am I going to take these ashes and use them for good? And if you read all throughout scripture, and I just so related with Job, and you see what happened to Job, right?
Yeah.
Losing his whole family, his wife, everything.
Everything.
But he still served the Lord. And there's a scripture verse in Job that says, though he slay me, I will still follow him. I will still love him. And I thought, well, if Job can do that, like, well, why can't I? And so I just chose to believe. And again, it was not something that happened overnight. It took time. It took me growing in my walk and being close with the Lord and seeing his promises and his goodness over time. But it was a choice, Nancy. It was a choice to say, okay, I'm going to be bitter and angry over here, and I'm going to, spew that out to my kids, or I'm going to rise above it and really believe that God is going to use this for good, which that then comes to your question of, why are you doing this? And when you've been wounded, whatever it is, whether you've been sexually abused or physical abuse, depression, whatever your wound is, you try to wrap your mind around it, and you can't. More often than not, you can't. So I said to the Lord, and I have these very, very straightforward conversations with him. He probably just laughs at me, but I'm like, if you're going to allow this, like, you got to put this for good use. Like, if you're going to let me go through this pain, like, you better do something with it.
What are you going to do?
Right. And so I was like, I'm telling God, you better do something with it. He just laughs at me. But the reality is that you want your pain to be used for good and for a purpose. And it is not comfortable in any way, shape, or form talking to people about sexual abuse or physical abuse or your drinking or whatever it is. But when 1 in 3 women have been sexually abused, when 1 in 4 men have been sexually abused.
I did not know that.
It's incredible. Tim Tebow just did a whole show on human sex trafficking, and he was talking about the statistics of abused victims. And when you have that, and you have a society that tries to hide it. So a lot of my upbringing, you were just taught to shove everything under the rug, right? Like, you don't talk about it. If you don't talk about it, it's not there. It didn't happen.
For sure.
And so I just felt like God was saying, Tonya, you need to talk about this, and you need to bring this to light to help validate the men and women who have gone through this trauma, who who can learn that there's hope on the other side, that they don't have to, transcend to their children bitterness or anger, but they can be free from that, and to show their children how to overcome. So that's a really long answer to your first question.
No, but it's so amazing because I think that, we all as humans think that that's probably the biggest, most terrible, awful violation, right? Is sexual abuse, and especially of a child. I mean, you hear about prisoners in prison ostracizing the men who've done that. I mean, even like the most hardened criminals ostracize them because it is so just terrible and awful. And I just think it's amazing that like you said it was a choice. Am I going to live with this and be angry and bitter and really have it destroy probably your marriage and your children, or choose to believe that God is good and that this was for a reason that I may not know until I get to heaven on the other side, but I'm trusting in his character, right? That he is good. And I love that Job was, you could relate to that, right? Because he did lose everything. So, but I think for people listening, I hear that a lot. It may not be sexual abuse, but it is, if God is so good, why is this happening or that happening? Or, all of the terrible things we see on the news every night. And I love that you were able to pull his character out of what happened to you and to hold on to that and remember that he is good and that he will use everything, for the good. Everything that happens he'll use it for good.
Yes. Romans 8:28 says that. That was the verse that I, really camped on. Was it says he will use all things for good. And I think it's one of those things where it's easy to, be angry, right? Because it gives you a false sense of power. But really it hurts you more than you. I mean, I was a very, very, very angry person, very angry at what happened to me. And, the Lord had to, I talk about a lot about building the Great Wall of Tonya. So brick by brick, putting this barrier around me so that nobody could get in and get to know me, because I thought I had to self-protect myself, because if I self-protected myself, you couldn't hurt me. And so I built all these walls and these barriers, and not allowing anybody to get in or out. And I can remember my husband saying to me one particular time early on in our marriage, he said, "Why won't you just let me love you?" And I was like, I don't think I didn't, what do you say?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Were you conscious of the building brick by brick, or was it something that you just subconsciously did?
Yeah, I think it's both. You build defense mechanisms when you're going through trauma, or when you have been through trauma, or you see things, right? So I built that tough girl persona, like, don't mess with me, I'll kick your butt kind of girl. That was me for sure. And so I
can't even imagine you like that. Yeah.
That's how you know Jesus is working, right? Yeah. But my high school friends will tell you, no, she really was. But it's both, but it's a self-protection. It's because you think you know better than God on how to protect yourself. But what you inadvertently do is you keep the good things out because you've built this up. And that's, what I was doing with my husband, was because, I'd been wounded at the hands of men so many times. I was like, I don't trust you. And so it was just a work in progress, really, where the Lord just had to, again, break down those walls. But it's a choice. It really is a choice. And it's easy, like I said, to take the angry route, but it's very hard to be vulnerable and allow the Lord to soften those pieces of your heart.
Well, so how did you, or how were you able to overcome the fear of talking about this? Because there is so much shame around it. A lot of times for victims, it's sort of a taboo topic. I mean, you don't, just talk about it all the time at the dinner table, right? It's not news, sports, or weather for sure. And so how did you, overcome telling anybody, your husband, much less the world, like you're doing now? How did you get past that?
Well, I haven't. I'm not there. Actually, I still am very scared. Like, I still, the enemy just whispers, no one's going to believe you. Why are you doing this? I mean, that still goes on over here.
Sure.
And every week that I want to quit my podcast, which is honestly every week, because you think, you in your head, you're like, well, why am I doing this? Am I even making a difference? Like, Lord, I'm putting myself out there and I'm being vulnerable, but why am I doing it? And then every week, even leading up to the starting of the podcast, I just had every excuse why I couldn't do it. And every week at church, it was all about sharing your story, sharing your testimony. And so at some point you're either like, okay, I'm getting whacked upside the head. I have to follow through with this. Yeah. And then when I started and I was like, Lord, I just don't think, this is what I should be doing. Like, are you sure? He always sends somebody who says, I listened to your podcast this week. Thank you so much for encouraging me. And he's so gracious and good to me in that, because there literally are so many times where I want to quit, but he sends that person to give me that message to say, no, don't. And so but I'm still scared, Nancy. Like,
sure, you're doing it afraid.
I'm doing it afraid. I'm doing it afraid.
You're doing it afraid. And I think that's what faith is, right?
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means the trust in him, right? And the belief in him. And I think that's what it's all about, is doing it afraid, because we get so trapped in our fear of, what will anybody think? Or like you said, the devil, he is a son of a gun. He knows just what our Achilles heel is, just where to bite us in the ankles to make us think, oh, what am I doing? This is crazy. Yes. And you hear people like Brene Brown say she gets out of bed every day and has to tell herself, I am worthy. I am good. What I'm doing makes a difference. So he gets at all of us. And so I love that you're doing it afraid. So many of us get scared.
Right. That's where the courage comes in, right? Like, you have two options, right? Really, you just don't do it, or you do it regardless. And that's why courage is so important. And I think courage, that's why I call it Courageous Overcomers, because courage is inspiring to others, right? When you do the hard stuff and you do the things that no one else wants to do. And I think losing my mom early in life taught me so much about the frailty of life and how quickly you can lose somebody. And you don't know when your time is going to be. And I didn't want to leave a legacy to my kids of pain or victim or poor me or anger or, the drunk. I didn't want that for them because of how I grew up. Even though my mom was my best friend and she was a very good woman, I still didn't want my kids to have that. I wanted them to have something. I wanted them to have the legacy. And so, that was important to me. And that, to me, is something that does take courage. But I think God gives you the courage if you lean into him.
Yes. And I think that's the key, is to lean into him, because I believe faith is an action verb. We not only just believe, but we've got to step out in that faith, whether it's a new job or, a move or whatever you want. We can't just sit on the couch and say, God will deliver. We have to step out in that fear to do whatever it is, and he'll meet us there, and he will open doors and opportunities and give us so much courage, and that we couldn't even, more than we could ask or imagine, right?
Right.
But it is that doing that you've done. And so I have to ask, your kids, how were they when you told them? Because that's kind of a big thing to tell your children that happened to their mom.
So they said it makes them sad. In fact, I'm like, did you guys listen to the podcast? And they're like, Mom, like one of them, one of my sons, I have 3 sons and 2 girls. And one of my sons like, Mom, I just can't. It's so sad. And I'm like, well, this week's episode's not like, and so,
right.
So, but it's been great because, from an addiction standpoint, they have some friends that struggle with addiction. So they've been able to share my podcast with their friends to be able to help them with the addiction or addictions in their family or whatever. And so, my kids have been really great about it, and they understand why I'm very sensitive, obviously, to this issue, sensitive to addiction. I mean, if, any of your listeners have grown up in an alcoholic home, just the smell of alcohol can be enough to trigger you. So my kids are very good about that, and I'm very thankful for them. And it was a opportunity because my oldest daughter's hearing impaired and my youngest daughter has a seizure disorder, and so we were able to walk alongside them and not let them be defined by their handicaps, right? And to be like, okay, look, yes, you're hearing impaired. What are we going to do about this? Like, we got to figure out how we go forward. And the one daughter that had the seizure disorder, she was in special ed for many years, and being able to help her overcome and get out of that and be an A student. And so again, God uses all of these things for good. And I'm thankful that He gave me the tools to be able to help equip them.
Yes. Golly. Because, you haven't just had sexual abuse, which is huge, but you also were in an alcoholic home. And, I mean, would you classify yourself as an alcoholic before I say that, or a recovery?
Yeah.
Come that, which if I know so many people that have not been able to do that, and you're 31 years sober. So God has really just been there for you. But like you said, you leaned into Him and you had to do the work. But boy, has He carried you.
Yes.
Do you worry about your kids having that gene?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
and they'll like, cause they drink. I mean, they don't drink to like oblivion or stupidity, but they do drink, and they've made some stupid decisions. And so like, I'll, send them Instagram reels, and they're like, Mom, do you think we're drunks? And I'm like, no, but I'm like, first off, they've never seen their parents drink, right? We've never drank in front of them, and thank God we've not. But so it's just hard because, again, that smell of alcohol, and then you start to worry, and you're like, look, your mom's an alcoholic, your dad's an alcoholic, your grandfather's an alcoholic, like it's there. So you got to pay attention to this and make sure that you're aware of your situation and your surroundings. And, at the end of the day, when it comes to parenting and all of that, because it's hard because you want to protect them from everything. But God just is like, Tonya, you're the babysitter. I'm going to take care of them. You do the best that you can. Yeah. And so I have to let it go. But I 100% worry about that. And they know that we worry about it because
I think that's great that you've had that dialogue. You don't just pretend that the elephant in the room isn't there, right?
No way.
And I think that's so important. And then, like you said, I mean, ultimately God says they're mine.
Yeah.
And they're yours for a season, but they're mine. And I think that you've given them such a gift in being able to talk about it.
I think that's the important thing, is that, and it goes to kind of the core of what I talk about on my podcast, is you can't heal what you're not willing to face. And because so many of us grew up in that era where, like I said, you just shove everything under the rug, but that helps nobody, right? Like, what does that do? How does that help any of us?
No, it doesn't. And so I love that you are sharing your story to help others. And that's what I want others to know, is that as women, we can live so afraid, so worried about what people are going to think of us, so worried about if we can do it, so worried about, am I smart enough? Am I old enough? Am I young enough? Am I enough all the time? Right. And then like you were saying, that voice of the devil that's always like, oh, you can't. Oh my gosh, nobody, all of this stuff. But you've pushed through that. And I know it's a daily thing or a weekly thing. It is for everybody. But you're living, out your testimony and enabling others to heal, hopefully, right, by hearing your story and validating what they've been through, to where they're not thinking, my gosh, is this just me? Is something so wrong with me? Is this somehow my fault? When I'm looking at it going, oh my gosh, how could this person think this is their fault? But I know that the children that happens to internalize that as somehow they did something wrong. And so I love that you are doing the hard thing and talking about it.
Well, and one thing I just want to share too with your listeners from a working back perspective on the am I good enough? As I was sharing about losing my mom early on, it put everything in perspective for me. So when I'm thinking, can I do this? Can I make this bold decision? Can I share this? Can I, overcome this? I think, what do I want my legacy to be? When people are sitting around after I've passed, do I want them to say, well, she was a bitter old lady, right?
Right.
Or do I want them to say, she was funny and courageous and inspiring and loved the Lord, right? And so I look at that, and I've even coached women to write out what you want people to say at your funeral. And I know that sounds so final and morbid, but it really helps, because when you write,
I think it's so cool. Yeah.
when you write out what,
then you live that, right?
Yes, because it puts things in perspective of how you're living out your life. What are people thinking about you when you die? And you've been there. You've been in those funerals where nobody is there, or it was the, cantankerous old person. That is not what God put us on earth for, Nancy. God put us on earth to live boldly and courageously and inspire others. And so I appreciate that you're empowering women to do that, because they need to be given the permission and the space to know that God's called them for such a time as this, and that they have purpose.
Yes, I love that. And I love Esther so much. That whole book, I know you just quoted from there, but I love her. She's like just such a superhero, but thank you. I mean, this is so amazing. Tonya, I've loved today. And I don't know if y'all can hear this, but I'm stopped up today. But God was like, you're doing this today. Like he knew I needed to talk to you today, even though I'm not feeling 100%. And I am just so like wowed by you. Thank you. And I love how you give him the glory. And I mean, that it's just beautiful. You don't see a lot of that anymore these days. Everybody's like, me, I did, I, me. And so I really appreciate that about you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yeah. If there's one thing you could tell our listeners that may be struggling either from past sexual abuse, current abuse, alcoholism in their family, or their own, what would that be? I'm sure there's several, but if you had somebody that's driving along the road right now and they're like, oh my gosh, this is me and nobody knows, or, I can't stop drinking, or whatever it is, what would you say?
Well, first and foremost, I have a resource on my website that they can go download, and it's the 5-day heal and cleanse. And that very first day is all about acknowledging. That's the very first step, is acknowledging that you are aware that you might have a problem, whether it's, an addiction, or whether it's past abuse or depression or whatever. That's the very first step, is acknowledging it, right? Because if you've shoved it under the rug, you've never acknowledged it. So that's the number one thing, is acknowledging that. And then, one of the most instrumental things for me, I journaled. I just wrote everything out ugly. I've got tons and tons of notebooks, and just wrote everything out that I wanted to say to people. Obviously, if you don't want your kids to read it later in life, burn it. But just write things out ugly, and write out what you're feeling and what you're going through and the emotion. Begin to ask God to help you soften your heart to hear what he has for you. And I would say that's the first and foremost, is just acknowledging that you even are struggling, because that in and of itself is half the battle.
It's huge, right? Well, and they can find that. It's called the 5-day cleanse.
Yeah,
right?
It's on my website. Yes.
On
and
your website.
if they go to my website and they can put in their email for updates, I can send it. But there's also a tab on there. They just click it and download it, and it's theirs.
Love that. Okay. So for y'all listening, I'm going to get the website one more time. It's Tonya at TonyaShellnut.com. And Tonya is Tonya at Tonya. Then Shellnut is SHELLNUTT.com. She also has a podcast. Where can they find your podcast, Courageous Overcomers?
Yeah, any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify.
Okay. And then she has a book called Wounded and Defined: From Victim to Victor. You can find that on Amazon or on her website. Tonya, thank you. This is amazing. I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to meet you. And I just love what you're doing. You're living out, your testimony. Thank you.
Well, thank
you,
Nancy.
Inspiring. Okay, guys, thank you for tuning in today, and we will see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to She Laughs. If this episode encouraged you, would you share it with a friend who might need a little courage or a reminder that she's not alone? Every share helps more women find their inner cool girl and kick fear to the curb. You can find links to our guests, watch full episodes on YouTube, and connect with me on social at She Laughs Podcast Official, all in the show notes. And remember, the dream inside of you means something. Take the first step. Be brave. God's got your back. And girl, you've got this.